going to share a terrifying experience that happened to me and my girlfriend in upstate New York. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the quiet neighborhood. My girlfriend Sarah and I were house-sitting for my mom when the strange events began. We were relaxing on the couch. The only sound, the crackling of the fireplace and the soft ticking of the clock. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a chilling sound. Heavy footsteps approaching the house. We looked out the window and saw a shadowy figure emerging from the darkness. A large, burly man, his face obscured by the dim moonlight, stood there. He was wearing a dark hoodie and jeans, and his breath fogged in the cold air. He was carrying a plastic bag, which seemed out of place for the late hour. As we watched in horror, the man began moving quickly in a strange, shuffling way across the street. The crunching of his boots on the frozen ground echoed through the night. He then disappeared into the darkness, leaving us frozen in fear. "Did you see that?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "I couldn't believe my eyes," I replied, my heart pounding in my chest. The sudden intrusion shattered the peaceful atmosphere of the house. We quickly turned off all the lights and retreated to the laundry room, our hearts pounding in our chests. The only sound was the soft creaking of the floorboards beneath our feet. After what felt like an eternity, I cautiously peeked out the window again. The man was nowhere to be seen. The only sound was the distant howling of a coyote. "I'm scared," Sarah admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "Me too," I replied, taking her hand. "We'll be okay." Just as we were beginning to think it was over, we heard a chilling sound, a knock on the door. We rushed over, our hearts pounding in our ears. The doorknob was jiggling, as if someone was trying to force their way in. The sound of the jiggling doorknob was amplified in the silent house, echoing through the hallways. "What do we do?" Sarah asked, her voice filled with fear. "I don't know," I replied, my voice shaking. "Just stay calm." Luckily, the door was locked. One of my mom's dogs, a small rescue pup named Max, started barking and growling fiercely at the intruder. His loud, screechy bark filled the house, echoing off the walls. The sound was so intense that it seemed like it would shatter the windows. We called my mom to ask for advice, and she told us not to worry. She thought it might have been someone who was drunk or high. The next morning, we decided to tell my mom about the incident. She was shocked and concerned. She told us that this wasn't the first time something strange had happened at her house. She had heard stories of other people seeing strange figures lurking around the neighborhood at night. We decided to do some research online and found some local folklore about a ghostly figure that was said to haunt the area. The stories described a tall, shadowy figure that would appear out of nowhere and disappear just as quickly. "Do you think it could be him?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I replied, my voice filled with doubt. "But it's definitely possible. Could the man we had seen be the ghost, or was it just a coincidence? We'll never know for sure. But one thing is certain, that night was one of the most terrifying experiences of our lives." My name is Sarah, and I've always lived in the city. Last summer, my boyfriend Lucas suggested we spend a weekend in a cabin deep in Blackwood Forest. He thought it would be a great way to escape from everything, just us and nature. At first, I didn't like the idea, but I eventually agreed. The cabin was old and hidden in a clearing, surrounded by tall trees that seemed to watch over us. There was no cell signal or internet, just an old landline phone and a radio that barely worked. Lucas loved the isolation, but I felt uneasy the whole time. That first night, the forest was strangely quiet. As the wind picked up, the silence felt heavier. Around midnight, I heard a soft tapping sound. At first, I thought it was tree branches hitting the windows, but when I looked, the trees were still. The tapping continued. Light, steady knocks, as if someone was gently tapping on the cabin walls. I felt a chill, but I tried to brush it off. Later that night, as we got ready for bed, the feeling of being watched crept in. I checked the locks on the doors and windows twice, but the cabin still felt too open, too exposed, as if something was outside, waiting for us. At around 2 a.m., I woke up suddenly. The room was dark, lit only by a bit of moonlight. The tapping had returned, louder this time, coming from the front door. My heart raced as I lay there, listening to the sound. The tapping stopped after a few minutes, and the cabin became completely silent, but the sense that something was nearby never went away. I eventually fell asleep again, but the next morning, the feeling of unease stayed with me. As we hiked through the woods that day, I kept feeling like we were being watched. Every shadow seemed to move. Every sound made me nervous. That night, the tapping got worse. It came from all around the cabin, the windows, the walls, even the ceiling. It felt like someone or something was trying to get inside. The knocks got faster and louder. The fear was overwhelming, making the night feel endless. At some point, I must have fallen asleep out of exhaustion. When I woke up just before dawn, the tapping had stopped, but the room was cold. I reached over, but Lucas was gone. Panic hit me when I saw the bedroom door slightly open. The dresser we had pushed in front of it was moved aside. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped into the hallway. The cabin was completely still. My heart pounded as I searched for Lucas, but he was nowhere to be found. That's when I saw it. Scratched into the wooden floor near the front door were words, hurriedly carved but clear. My heart raced as the tapping echoed around the cabin, growing louder with each beat. I turned the flashlight toward the walls, searching for the source of the sound. Shadows danced in the beam of light, and for a moment, I thought I saw a figure flicker just beyond my sight. I stepped back, the cold creeping in around me. Every instinct told me to run, but I couldn't leave without Lucas. I called his name again, but only silence answered. The air felt thick and heavy, as if the cabin itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Then I heard it, a low whisper, almost lost in the sound of the tapping. It seemed to come from the direction of the front door. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I approached, flashlight trembling in my hand. The whispers grew clearer, forming words that sent chills down my spine. "Let us in. We can help you." My breath caught in my throat. I backed away, my mind racing. Who were they? What did they want? The tapping intensified, frantic now, as if they were growing impatient. I felt a wave of panic wash over me. Suddenly, I remembered the old landline phone. If I could get to it, maybe I could call for help. I turned and hurried toward the small kitchen where the phone was. But as I passed the front door, it burst open with a loud crash, swinging wide against the wall. The air grew icy, and the whispers turned into an angry chorus. I froze, unable to move. Shapes began to form in the doorway, dark figures with indistinct features, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. They stepped forward, shadows creeping toward me. With a surge of adrenaline, I bolted toward the kitchen, grabbing the phone and frantically dialing. The line crackled, and I could barely hear anything over the chaos unfolding behind me. The shadows were getting closer, the whispers louder, demanding to be let in. I shouted into the phone, calling for help, but the line went dead. In a panic, I dropped it, turning to face the approaching darkness. The figures loomed over me, their presence suffocating. Just when I thought I would be consumed by the shadows, I spotted the door to the basement. I dashed toward it, yanking it open and slipping inside, slamming it shut behind me. The darkness enveloped me, and I fumbled for the light switch, my hands shaking. The bare bulb flickered on, illuminating the dusty, cluttered space, filled with old furniture and forgotten memories. I backed away from the door. I could still hear the whispers and tapping, but now it was muffled, as if the figures were trying to break through. I glanced around, searching for something, anything, to defend myself. In the corner, I spotted an old wooden chair. I grabbed it and positioned myself against the door, ready to hold it closed. The whispers became frantic, echoing in the small space. "Let us in. We just want to help." As the door rattled violently, I pressed my back against it, my heart racing. The shadows were trying to push through, but the chair held firm. Would I be stuck here forever, trapped in this cabin with whatever was outside? Suddenly, the rattling stopped. An eerie silence fell over the basement. I held my breath, listening. For a moment, I thought I was safe, but then a low voice broke the silence. "Help us, please." I realized the voices weren't just demanding, they were pleading. I had to know what they wanted. With a deep breath, I released the chair and stepped away from the door. The shadows surged forward, but I stood my ground, ready to face whatever was coming. The door creaked open slowly, revealing the dark figures. They hovered just beyond the threshold, their forms indistinct but filled with a sense of desperation. Help us find peace," they whispered. "We were trapped here long ago, lost in the woods. You are the only one who can help us move on." I hesitated. They looked so lost, so desperate. I knew I had to make a choice. The cabin had felt like a prison, but perhaps it was also a place of healing. I stepped forward, holding my hand out. "How can I help you?" The shadows shifted closer, and a warmth spread through the room, filling the cold air. "You must free us from this place," they whispered. "You must acknowledge our pain, and we can finally move on." I closed my eyes, feeling their presence surround me. I focused on the stories they carried: loss, regret, longing. I spoke softly, acknowledging their suffering, promising to remember them, to tell their stories. The shadows swirled around me, their whispers turning from desperation to gratitude. Slowly, the figures began to fade, their forms dissipating into the air. The room grew warm, filled with a soft light. I opened my eyes, and the basement was empty. The oppressive weight lifted. With a sigh of relief, I walked back up the stairs, emerging into the cabin's living room. The sunlight poured in through the windows, illuminating the space. Everything felt different now, lighter, freer. I stepped outside, taking a deep breath of the fresh forest air. The darkness had been lifted, and I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I glanced back at the cabin, grateful for the experience, but ready to leave it behind. As I walked away, I knew the stories of the lost souls would remain with me, woven into the very fabric of the forest. I would carry their memories, sharing them with the world. I could finally leave Blackwood Forest behind, but the lessons I learned there would stay with me forever. I'll never forget the night I met David at Comic-Con. What started as an exciting weekend, surrounded by fellow fans and creators, quickly turned into the most terrifying experience of my life. It was Saturday night, and my friends and I had been having a great time. We were staying in a nice hotel near the convention center, sharing a suite. The energy from the convention was electric. People dressed in their favorite costumes, the latest comic releases being displayed, and everyone seemed to be having the time of their lives. After a day of exploring panels and shopping for rare comics, I decided to head down to the exhibition hall by myself for some quiet time, away from the crowd. That's when I first met David. He seemed like any other Comic-Con attendee, wearing a worn Batman t-shirt and a lanyard full of convention badges. He had a friendly face, maybe in his mid-20s, and approached me with a huge smile, eager to talk about the latest superhero series. I didn't think much of it at first. We chatted casually for a while, discussing comics and upcoming movie releases. He asked me about my favorite characters, my favorite booths at the convention, but I kept things light, not giving away much personal information. I didn't even tell him my real name. When our conversation drifted toward his fascination with darker, horror-based comics, I started to feel a little uneasy. There was something in the way he talked about the violence in those comics, the excitement in his voice when he described the villains, that made me uncomfortable. But I brushed it off. After all, it was Comic-Con, and people liked all kinds of genres. Later that evening, back in the hotel suite with my friends, I felt relieved. We laughed, drank a bit, and shared stories of our favorite moments from the day. I had almost forgotten about David. That's when the knock on the door came. It was David. I was surprised, and my heart raced a little. How had he found my room? I had never told him where I was staying. He must have seen me earlier when I came back from the exhibition hall. He smiled as though nothing was wrong, asking if I wanted to go for a walk. I should have said no. Every part of me told me to decline, but maybe it was the drinks. Maybe it was the fact that we were at a convention full of people, but I agreed. As we walked through the hotel corridors, I immediately sensed something was off. The hallway was quieter than usual, eerily quiet. The buzz of excitement from the convention felt miles away. David's behavior had shifted too. He wasn't the cheerful fan I had met earlier. His demeanor was darker, his tone more serious. He started talking about one of his favorite comic books again. But this time, it was a disturbing, horror-themed story. He described it in vivid detail, focusing on the violent scenes, how the killer in the comic would stalk his victims, how their fear would grow as they realized they couldn't escape. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Then, David shifted the conversation to true crime. He talked about real-life murders with an almost obsessive interest, describing how some killers were never caught, how they blended into everyday life. My discomfort grew into fear. I realized how isolated we were. The hallways were empty. The hotel staff had long since retired for the night. I mumbled something about needing to head back to my room, but David didn't seem to hear me. He had this intense look in his eyes now, as if he was enjoying my unease. That's when things escalated. Without warning, he grabbed my arm. At first, I froze, unsure of what was happening. His grip tightened, and he started pulling me toward the staff elevator at the end of the hallway. I panicked, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. I tried to pull away, but his grip was strong, too strong. He kept his eyes on me the whole time, his expression unreadable. Fear coursed through my veins as I struggled to break free. I called out, my voice shaky at first, but then louder, screaming for help. David's calm exterior cracked for a second, a flash of frustration crossing his face as he tightened his hold, dragging me closer to the elevator. I kicked at him, adrenaline giving me the strength I didn't know I had. My mind raced with thoughts of how this could end. How had I ended up in this situation? This was supposed to be a safe space, a celebration of fandom and creativity, not a place where nightmares came true. Suddenly, out of nowhere, I heard voices, laughter echoing from the other end of the hall. A group of girls dressed in cosplay were coming around the corner. They spotted us instantly, and I screamed again, louder this time. They rushed over, their cheerful faces shifting to concern. David let go of my arm, his expression quickly changing to one of nonchalance, as if nothing had happened. Without saying a word, he disappeared down the hallway, slipping into the shadows of the convention. The girls surrounded me, asking what had happened. I could barely get the words out. My hands were shaking, and I felt like I was going to be sick. They stayed with me, comforting me, as I told them everything. One of them immediately called hotel security, and I reported the incident. David was nowhere to be found by the time they arrived. They searched the hotel, but he had vanished. I was left shaken, my mind replaying the entire ordeal over and over again. That night taught me a powerful lesson. Trust your instincts. No matter how safe a place might seem, danger can always be lurking in the shadows, disguised as a friendly face. It was a lonely night. The house was too big, too empty without the kids. The silence was scary. I stood in the backyard, kicking a soccer ball. I felt scared because of the old stories about the land. They said it was built on a place where people were buried long ago. The sun was going down, making long, scary shadows. I decided to clean the house to keep myself busy. As I mopped the floor, I couldn't stop feeling like someone was watching me. It was like something was hiding in the dark, waiting for me. Later, I went swimming to cool off. The water was nice, but it was dark around me. There were little lights like tiny blinking eyes. Then I heard a splash in the pool. I sat up, surprised. Another splash. Something was throwing rocks from the woods behind the fence. I was scared. I tried to tell myself it was just animals, but the feeling of being watched was getting stronger. As it got really dark, A bad smell filled the air. It was the smell of something dead, something rotting. Birds flew away, their scared sounds echoing in the night. I jumped out of the pool, my heart beating fast. I locked the door behind me, feeling silly for letting my imagination get the best of me. But the scary feeling wouldn't go away. I tried to relax by playing video games, but I couldn't feel calm. I kept hearing quiet sounds, like my daughter calling for me. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks, but I felt cold all over. Then I heard it again, louder this time, my heart beating fast. I called out, but there was no answer. I grabbed my phone, hoping for a call from my kids, but there was nothing. Just then, I saw a message on my phone, a video from my daughter. I opened it, expecting to see her smiling face. Instead, I saw her skating at the roller rink, happy and having fun. I was very scared. My daughter was far away, but someone or something had called my name like it was her. I tried to tell myself it was just my mind playing tricks, but the room felt heavier, colder. The silence was scary. I tried to calm myself, but the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I wasn't alone. Something was watching me, waiting. I heard a knock at the front door. It was quiet at first, but it felt loud in the quiet house. I grabbed a baseball bat and looked through the little hole in the door. No one was there. I was scared as I hesitated. The knocking got louder, more urgent. "Please help me," a man's voice shouted. I knew the voice, but it didn't make sense. Mr. Miller, my neighbor, had moved away a long time ago. I unlocked the door, holding the bat. I opened it, ready to fight. But the yard was empty. The only thing moving were a couple of possums running across the lawn. I closed the door again, my heart beating fast. What was happening? Was I going crazy? I stepped back from the door, feeling cold. The air in the house felt colder, heavier. Then I heard it again, this time from behind me. "Please help me." I turned around, holding the bat, but there was no one there. I was shaking with fear. The voice was inside the house. I stepped back slowly, looking around the room. Every shadow seemed darker, every corner hiding something. The air was full of fear. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't make a sound. Suddenly, the door opened. I didn't touch it, didn't unlock it, but the door opened, letting in a rush of cold air that smelled like something dead, something rotting. I gagged, covering my mouth. My mind was telling me to run. A tall, dark figure stepped through the doorway, its glowing yellow eyes looking at me. I stumbled backward, dropping the bat. The figure didn't move. It just watched me, not blinking. I was very scared. I knew the horror that was coming. I stumbled backward, dropping the bat. The figure didn't move. It just watched me, not blinking. I was very scared. I knew the horror that was coming. The lights flickered off, and the room was plunged into darkness. In the faint glow from my phone, I saw them, figures moving through the room, their eyes glowing, their bodies twisted and wrong. I screamed, but my voice was swallowed by the darkness as they closed in. I never should have stayed here. For 11 years, I've been haunted by something that happened when I was 12. I live in Stewart, a tiny mountain town with less than 600 people. What happened to me that October changed my life, and to this day, I still don't understand it. On November 5th, 2014, my father, grandfather, and I went elk hunting early in the morning. It was quiet, eerily quiet. You could barely hear the animals moving. We hiked about 4 miles from the trucks when everything went dead silent. My grandpa, trying to ease the tension, joked, "When the woods go quiet, there's a predator around. Guess they know how mean we are." I laughed, but it didn't help. Something about that morning felt off, like we weren't the only ones out there. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. We didn't see anything all day, so we decided to heed back. As we got closer to the trucks, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. About 250 feet from the trail, we heard a scream. It was so close, closer than anything should have been, without us seeing it. My grandpa told us to move fast. We all piled into the truck, and as we backed up, I caught a glimpse of it. A tall, dark figure, like a twisted mix of a man and a deer, its claws sharp and teeth razor-like. It was smiling. My grandpa saw it too, because he didn't say a word the whole way back. He just focused on getting us out of there. We didn't make it home until 6 p.m. Later that night, I overheard my grandpa and dad talking. My grandpa asked, "Did you see it too?" My dad didn't believe him, said it was all stories he used to tell, but I knew it was real. I told them I saw it, and I could tell by the look in my grandpa's eyes that he believed me. My dad, though, said it was just paranoia after hearing that scream, but it wasn't a mountain lion. My grandpa said it was something else, something older. That night, I went to bed, but I woke up around 5:30 a.m. to the sound of my grandpa trying to stop my dad from going back into the mountains. He was convinced it wasn't over, and deep down, so was I. My dad never came back. They searched the mountains, but they never found a trace of him. Weeks went by. Then the knocking started. Every night, a knock at my window. And every night, I heard my dad's voice. "Let me in," he'd say. I forgot my keys, but the voice was always just wrong, like someone trying to imitate him, but not quite getting it right. For years, I lived with that knocking. My grandpa told me never to answer, and I didn't. When my grandpa passed away, the knocking didn't stop. It just changed. Now, it's his voice I hear too. Both of them, calling to me from the woods. Every night they get louder. Every night, it gets harder to ignore. I know it's only a matter of time before whatever took them takes me too. I don't know how much longer I can resist. Growing up in an old, spooky house was always a scary adventure. Sometimes, those adventures could turn into nightmares. I was the youngest of 3, and I had the scary job of sleeping in the basement. It was a cold, dark place, but my parents said it was good for my health. As a kid, I didn't mind. It felt like my own secret hideout. I'd spend hours down there, playing with my toys, reading comics, and imagining all sorts of scary things. But as I got older, something strange began to happen. I started waking up in the middle of the night, feeling all sweaty and scared. I'd hear weird noises coming from the dark parts of the basement, creaking floorboards, scary whispers, and cold drafts. One night, I decided to be brave and check it out. I grabbed a flashlight and crept down the narrow, winding staircase. The basement was pitch black, except for a little bit of light coming from the cellar door. As I got closer to the cellar, I heard a faint scratching sound. I shined my flashlight into the darkness, and my heart nearly stopped. There, hiding in the corner, was a scary, skinny man. His eyes were wide with fear, and his ragged clothes were dirty and torn. I screamed and ran back upstairs, my legs shaking with fear. I burst into my parents' room, babbling about the monster in the basement. My parents, at first, didn't believe me, but they quickly realized something was wrong. They called the police, and when they arrived, they found the scary man hiding in the cellar. It turned out to be a homeless man who had somehow managed to get into the house through a broken window. He had been living in the basement for weeks without anyone knowing. The incident scared me a lot, but it also made me appreciate the safety of my home. From then on, I always locked the doors and windows, and I never ventured into the basement alone at night. It was a hot summer night, and the neighborhood park was buzzing with activity. The smell of grilling burgers and the sound of laughter filled the air, but John and I weren't enjoying ourselves. We were bored and wanted to do something different. John said, "Let's go door-ditch Savannah's house. She lives just down the street." I wasn't sure about it. Savannah was the most popular girl in school, and her dad was my dentist. But John was so excited, I couldn't resist. Savannah's house was a big white mansion with a sprawling lawn. It looked like something out of a magazine, but when we got there, it was eerily quiet. No cars were in the driveway, and the lights were off. "Maybe she's on vacation. Let's just peek inside," John said. As we stepped inside, a chill ran down my spine. The house was dark and musty, and cobwebs hung from the ceiling. Strange noises echoed from upstairs, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. John said to me, "Don't worry, it's probably just the wind." I tried to convince myself he was right, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. We split up to explore the house. John went into a room on the second floor, and I heard him start to scream. I ran to him and saw him pointing at the closet door. It was slightly ajar, and I could hear faint whispers coming from inside. Just then, the closet door burst open, and a shadowy figure emerged. The man was tall and muscular, and his face was hidden in the darkness. His eyes glowed with an eerie light. We tried to run, but the man was too fast. He chased us through the house, his footsteps echoing in the empty hallways. We managed to find a window and climb out. As we were escaping, I glanced back at the house. The shadowy figure was still standing in the doorway, watching us go, but I wasn't so sure. I could still feel his eyes on me, cold and menacing. For days after, I couldn't stop thinking about the scary man. I felt like I was being watched, even in my own home. I couldn't sleep at night, and I was afraid to go outside. Finally, I decided to tell my parents what had happened. They were shocked and worried, and they promised to keep me safe. The police investigated the incident, but they couldn't find any evidence of a break-in. They suggested that we might have imagined the whole thing. I knew that wasn't true. I had seen the man with my own eyes. He was real. To this day, I still don't know who the man was or what he wanted, but I'll never forget the fear and terror I felt that night. It's a memory that will haunt me for the rest of my life. It was my first time camping alone. I had just turned 18, and I wanted to go on an adventure. I decided to ride my bike around the Appalachian Mountains, starting from my home in eastern Tennessee. I didn't have much experience with solo trips, and I wasn't sure what to expect. I left in the late afternoon, and as dusk approached, I found myself on a gravel trail that went through forested hills and small towns. As it got darker, I started thinking about where I should camp for the night. I didn't know where to go or what kind of spot would be good. I was only carrying basic supplies on my bike: a small tent, a tarp, a little food and water, and a flashlight. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me going between towns. I also had no way of keeping food cool, so I wasn't carrying anything that could spoil. Unlike some other bikers and backpackers I passed, who had huge loads of gear, I was traveling light. After a while, I noticed an area that seemed like it might work for camping. It was a grassy path that led into a clearing next to the bike trail. In the clearing, there were several old trailers parked. The trailers looked like they hadn't been moved in years, but the space between them was well maintained. I wasn't sure what to think, but I guessed the trailers were just being stored there. It seemed like a quiet place, so I decided to set up camp. I didn't bother with the tent because the weather was nice. I simply rolled out my sleeping bag and made a small fire to keep the bugs away. As the sun set, I ate a simple dinner and looked around the area. The clearing was surrounded by trees, and beyond them, I could see the lights of a town in the distance. It was closer than I thought, maybe only a mile or two away. As darkness fell, I turned on my small electric lamp and enjoyed the quiet night. There's something peaceful about being outdoors at night, away from all the noise of everyday life. When the fire finally burned out, I turned off my light and lay down to sleep. However, despite the calm surroundings, I felt a little uneasy. The old trailers standing tall around me seemed strange, but I didn't feel threatened. It was more of a creepy, unfamiliar feeling. The darkness felt heavy, almost like it was pressing down on me. I wasn't scared, but I did feel small and alone. It was one of the first times I truly missed home. Just as I was about to fall asleep, I heard a soft noise, like someone was moving through the grass. My heart skipped a beat as I strained to listen. Then I saw him, a shadowy figure emerging from behind one of the trailers, about 35 feet away. He moved slowly, his footsteps barely making a sound, which made my pulse race even more. He stopped for a moment, standing completely still, as if he was listening or watching. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't notice me. After what felt like forever, he started fumbling with his pants. It took me a second to understand what he was doing, but the way he stood there, motionless, except for that, made my skin crawl. The whole thing felt strange and wrong, like he wasn't acting normally. He was just standing there in the dark, with no care in the world, like he had all the time. I stayed completely still, frozen with fear, not daring to move or even breathe. My mind raced, wondering who he was and what he was doing out here. After he finished, the man slowly walked toward the woods near the town. I realized he was probably homeless or just passing through, but I didn't want to stay and find out. As soon as he disappeared into the trees, I knew I had to leave. I quickly packed up my things, my hands shaking as I loaded my bike. With only my headlamp for light, I rode down the trail as fast as I could. A few miles later, I found a gas station on the outskirts of a small town. I decided to camp behind it. The bright lights from the parking lot made me feel safer, but I didn't sleep much that night. It was a quiet Thursday night, and the house felt dark and empty. My dad was working late at the store, and my two brothers were away at college. For now, the house was mine, but it would soon become a nightmare. A few friends came over, and we watched a baseball game, laughing and sharing some beers. When they finally left through the back door, a strange chill filled the air. I went upstairs to put the leftover beers in the fridge, not realizing how dark the house had become. As I walked through the dark rooms, shadows seemed to stretch and twist. After I crawled into bed, I felt tired but couldn't sleep. The quiet of the house was heavy, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Then I heard soft footsteps coming up the stairs. My heart raced as I thought my dad had finally come home. I listened as he coughed and moved into the bathroom, the sounds echoing in the quiet hallway. But then I heard something that made my blood run cold. The clattering of dishes and cabinets opening in the kitchen below. Too lazy to get out of bed, I sent a quick text. "Can you please be quiet?" I put my phone on the desk and tried to shake off the uneasy feeling in my stomach. But then the footsteps returned, quickly coming up the stairs. My bedroom door creaked open, and a dark figure stood in the doorway. "Dad?" I called, but my voice felt weak and small. I couldn't see him clearly. The hallway light was off. I frowned, feeling a knot tighten in my chest. Just then, my phone vibrated with a new message. It was from my dad. "I'm still at work." My heart dropped. The figure in the doorway was not my father, trying to act calm even as fear took over. The figure didn't move, staying in the shadows. I felt trapped. I quickly texted my dad, "There's someone in the house. Call the police." His reply came quickly, "Okay." But then, a low, raspy voice filled the room, whispering, "Let me in," over and over again. The figure stepped closer, desperately searching for the lamp switch. When I turned on the light, the creature standing before me was no longer human. It had sharp yellow teeth and elongated fingers that twitched with excitement. "Let me in," it hissed, inching closer to my bed, its breath full and cold. Screaming in terror, I jumped off the bed and ran to the door, slamming it shut behind me. I pressed my weight against it as the creature banged and screeched, "I need to come in! Let me out!" Its voice echoed like a broken record, filling the room with a sense of dread. I could hear it scratching at the door, nails scraping against the wood, and I knew I had to hold on. My dad kept calling, but I couldn't pick up the phone. I held the door, praying for help, until I finally heard the police knock on the front door. Their voices were distant, but I knew I had to make it to them. With a rush of hope, I let go of the door and ran to them. But the creature lunged after me, its fingers clawing at the air. As I opened the door, I yelled, "Stop it!" The officers acted quickly, stepping inside and aiming their flashlights into the darkness. But the creature vanished into the shadows, leaving only an icy chill behind. I told the police everything that had happened. They searched the house but found nothing. They said the darkness could play tricks on your mind, but I knew better. One officer glanced at me with a concerned look, but I felt like they didn't believe me. Later, I learned that I had left the back door unlocked, which was how it had entered my home. The officers left after what felt like forever, but the fear didn't leave with them. As they stepped outside, the door creaked and closed behind them. I turned and locked it tightly, wishing I could lock my fear away too. But a heavy fear settled in my chest, and I knew I would never feel safe in my own home again. That night, every little noise made me jump. The wind howled outside, and the trees scraped against the windows like ghostly fingers. I tried to distract myself by watching TV, but every shadow in the room seemed to shift and move. I kept thinking about the creature and its twisted face. What if it came back? It was a quiet spring night, and I was home alone. The sun had set, leaving the sky dark and filled with stars. I sat in my room, enjoying the peacefulness of the evening. I was talking to my friend Mia on FaceTime, sharing stories about school and our favorite movies. Everything felt normal and fun. As I walked back and forth in my room, something outside caught my attention. I stepped over to the window to take a look. That's when I saw him, a man standing on the sidewalk, staring right at my house. At first, I thought I was imagining things. I leaned closer to the window, trying to see better. My heart started to race when I realized he was looking straight up at my window and began to feel scared. I told Mia there was someone outside, but she couldn't see him on the video call. She suggested I call my parents. Feeling anxious, I hung up and dialed my mom's number. It was late, and I knew I was waking her up. When she answered, she sounded sleepy and concerned. I explained that there was a man outside looking at our house. She told me to turn off my lights and close the blinds, thinking that would make him go away. I did as she said, turning off the lights and pulling the blinds shut. My heart was still racing as I sat on my bed, trying to calm down. But after a few minutes, I couldn't resist the urge to check again. I slowly lifted the blinds and peeked outside. To my shock, the man had moved closer to the house. He was now standing on the sidewalk, still staring up at my window. I felt another wave of fear wash over me. Why was he still there? Deciding it was time to call the police, I picked up my phone and dialed 911. The operator answered quickly, asking for details. I explained that there was a man outside my house who wouldn't leave. She asked if he was holding any weapons, but I said I didn't think so. She told me to stay inside and keep my doors locked and assured me that a patrol car would come by soon to check things out. After hanging up, I crawled back into bed, still feeling anxious. I called Mia again to share what was happening. She listened closely and suggested I check the window once more. Taking a deep breath, I got up to look outside again. To my relief, the man was gone. I stood by the window, waiting for the police to arrive. After a few minutes, I saw a police car pull up in front of my house. The officer got out and walked around, shining a flashlight into my yard and the neighboring properties, hoping the man had finally left. Once the patrol car drove away, I thought I could relax. I ended the call with Mia and tried to sleep, but after about 20 minutes, I heard a strange noise outside. It sounded like something cracking, like a branch breaking. My heart raced again as I sat up in bed, listening closely. I looked out the window, but there was no one there. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, but the noise continued to bother me. A few minutes later, I heard it again, this time louder. Feeling uneasy, I turned to the window again. To my horror, I saw a shadowy figure standing right outside my window, looking up at me. It felt like a scene from a scary movie. I froze, my mind racing. What was he doing? Then it all clicked. The cracking noises made sense now. The man had been climbing up the side of my house, and I ran to the other window screaming for help, hoping my neighbors would hear me. In a rush, I called 911 again, my hands trembling. I explained that there was a man trying to get into my house and that I needed help right away. The figure at my window tried to squeeze through the opening, but then he noticed one of my neighbors yelling outside. He stopped and looked confused for a moment, then jumped down and ran away. I took a deep breath, feeling a mix of relief and fear. A few minutes later, my elderly neighbor came over to check on me. She had heard my screams and wanted to make sure I was safe. When the police arrived again, I shared everything that had happened. They took notes and assured me they would patrol the area all night long. After they left, I felt a bit safer, but sleep was hard to find. That night felt incredibly long. I kept thinking about everything that had happened, feeling grateful for my neighbors who had helped me. Eventually, the sun began to rise, and I could finally relax. I learned an important lesson that night. It's always good to be careful. I also felt thankful for my friends and neighbors who were there for me during such a scary experience. From that day on, I made sure to keep my windows and doors locked, especially when I was home alone. And every spring, when the nights turned warmer, I remembered that night, knowing I could always count on my friends and family to help me when I needed it most.